Hello everyone, welcome back to Nid-life Crisis. Niall here. During a recent eBay trawl I came across this one-arm Warboss that was in a pretty bad state. It was on at the right money and I had a few spare bits and I thought this would be a nice project to do a bit of a rescue on. I, like most people this time of year, have been struggling for motivation, and this was a perfect little palette cleanser to get me back into my modelling groove. First things first, I stripped him from his base and popped him in the plastic baggie, filled it up with isopropyl alcohol. In an ideal world I probably would have put it in a ultrasonic cleaner, but I haven't got one of those yet, so this is the way that I'll carry on doing it for now. Making sure there wasn't a lot of air in the bag, I tightened up the top and set it aside for 24 hours, and then it was back to the day job. The next evening I dug it out, got the model out of the liquid and started to set to with a toothbrush. The isopropanol had done a really good job at starting to lift the paint, and it was really easy to get it off with the toothbrush. This mini was cleaning up really well and I was really pleased at this point. So I turned on a podcast and carried on scrubbing. With the mini cleaned up, it was time to dive into the bits box to try and find a replacement for that arm. I had a spare combi rocket from my knobs that I made from my Start Collecting box. I did also debate taking off his power claw and swapping it out for a big chopper, but it was the wrong handing, and ultimately I decided it would be too much work and the power claw didn't look too bad on the Warboss anyway. As the combi rocket is a two-handed weapon, I had to set to work trying to make it look like a one-handed weapon so that the Warboss didn't have an extra third hand. So cutting and scraping away with both the clippers and the craft knife, I just set to and started whittling and whittling the plastic until I was happy with it. With the gun ready, I cut the arm to make the joint a bit of an angle to make it look a bit of a more dynamic pose. At this point I knew I'd have to get the green stuff or milliput out and do a bit of creative sculpting to try and get the arm to fill out. As it stands, the power claw arm is massive compared to the arm, so I'm thinking I'm going to have to just do a bit of a big shoulder to try and hide the fact that it's a smaller arm. Before I mixed the milliput, I had a look around the model to see what other gaps there were. There were quite a few on the joints where the back part of the body meets the front, which I knew I'd have to fill in at the same time. I also decided I want to do some modifications to the gun to make it look a bit more impressive for the Warboss, so I was looking at different varieties of attaching a slugger to it to make it look a bit more custom shooter-esque. I found a spare knob slugger and decided to set about cutting the arm off and again making it look like part of a gun without the hand. Then it was time to mix the milliput. I didn't need a lot, just a piece about the size of my thumbnail. I mixed equal sized chunks of both parts of the two-part epoxy, and then I set to work mixing them both together well, kneading them between my thumbs and fingers. A good indicator of whether it's mixed enough or not is that it'll all be a consistent colour throughout. With it all mixed together, I grabbed one of my metal sculpting tools and started to fill in the cracks. This is a really satisfying part of rescuing or repairing any minis, I find. You get to put a bit of time and effort into it that the previous owner hasn't necessarily done. Not to say they haven't put any effort in, but this is just the step that takes it up a level, in my opinion. cracks filled in on both sides under the armpits, I move on to sculpting the shoulder. I make a ball of the resin and put it onto the sculpting tool, and then I push that in place on the shoulder, trying to get it to stay as a starting point. It can be a bit tricky at times to get it to come away from the metal sculpting tool, but with a bit of perseverance it eventually stuck to the model. Then all I needed to do was shape it around and make it look a bit more like a ball joint of a shoulder. I got a silicone sculpting tool out to flatten it a bit, put a bit of water on it so that the milliput didn't stick to the silicone. A bit of trial and error, poking and prodding, adding and taking away the material, and eventually I got it to a point where I was reasonably happy with it. I always had the option to let it dry and then sand it before I primed it anyway, so this was just getting it as close as I wanted it in the initial phase. Like most elements of the hobby, you have to come back to something 2 or 3 times rather than try and do it in one hit to make it better. Then a big bad Warboss needs a big bad base, so I got a bit of cork material out and started working at building up the base so that it had a bit of a platform to stand on. The bad moon side of my army are all based with sand, so this was going to be part of that, so a bit of cork on the top, and then I'd come in later on and glue the sand on before I primed the mini. I decided he needed to look a bit more dynamic, so I added another layer to the platform with the cork material and drilled a little hole for the peg that's under his foot, and when he's put on he looks quite good, I think. Basing done, I moved back on to the custom shooter that I'm just adding a couple of extra details to elevate it a bit past the basic combi rocket that was there already. The previous work earlier to flatten off was really helpful at this point because I could stick the slugger part to the side quite easily. Then I primed him up black and gave him a bit of a zenith or highlight, and this is what we ended up with. I'm so happy with how he's come out, and I'm really pleased because I think it looks pretty good, and I think over the last year of doing this hobby my skills have improved slightly, and I'm really quite pleased with it in fairness. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you could take a minute to like and subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. I'm looking to move on in the next calendar year. Pretty pleased with my progress this year from a standing start to the end of September. Wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. I hope in between all the food and drink you get a bit of time to do a bit of hobbying, and I hope that you get a few nice hobby bits and pieces that you can work on in the new year. Until then, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.